I walked into my daughter's house and heard my son-in-law laughing on the phone. "Your mother's too stupid to notice we're taking everything." I stood frozen behind him. He turned around, went pale, and stammered, "Mom." I smiled calmly and said, "Pack your things, both of you." What happened next left them begging on their knees. Subscribe to the channel, leave your like and comment from which part of the world you are watching, get comfortable and relax. Let's begin. The screen door was not fully closed. A sliver of afternoon light cut across the hallway floor, and through the gap, their voices carried with a terrible, casual clarity. I stood there, the warm weight of the peach cobbler in my hands. Its sweet cinnamon sent a stark contrast to the words that froze me in place. "She's too sweet to be suspicious, David. She trusts us." That was Chloe, my daughter. Her tone was not defensive, but explanatory. David's laughter followed, a dry, humorless sound. "Sweet is just another word for stupid in situations like this. She's too old and too slow to notice the details. The bank statements? She just files them. The credit line increase? She signed where I pointed. She doesn't have the mind for finance." I felt the ceramic dish grow heavy. The heat from the oven began to burn through the kitchen towel I'd wrapped around it, but I did not move. "Don't say that," Chloe said, but it was a whisper, a token protest. "It's true, look at this place." I could picture his gesture, encompassing their modern kitchen. "We've built this life." A little creative restructuring of her assets was just the seed capital. She'd have given it to you eventually anyway. We just accelerated the timeline, and she is literally too stupid to notice the difference. The word hung in the air. Stupid. It landed not as an insult, but as a clinical diagnosis. It reduced 68 years of life, of teaching children to read, of balancing a budget as a single mother, of solving daily crossword puzzles in ink, to a single, contemptuous label. My heart did not pound. It grew very still and very cold. The warmth of the hallway vanished. I looked down at the cobbler, the golden crust I had carefully latticed, the peaches from the farmer's market she had loved as a child. A prop. A symbol of the doting, simple mother they believed me to be. I did not burst in. I did not cry out. A strange, quiet clarity settled over me. I shifted the cobbler to one arm, my movements deliberate. I reached out and pulled the screen door fully open. The metallic slide of the track was loud in the sudden silence. I stepped into the kitchen. Chloe was at the island, her back to me, a glass of water in her hand. David was leaning against the refrigerator, a tablet in his hands. His smile, left over from his laughter, faltered and then reset into a practiced, welcoming grin. It did not reach his eyes. "Mom, you're early," Chloe said, turning. Her smile was easier, but her eyes flickered to David for a fraction of a second. "The cobbler was quicker to set than I thought," I said. My voice sounded normal. It came from a great distance. I placed the dish on the cool granite counter. "I hope it's still warm for dessert." "It smells amazing," David said, pushing off from the refrigerator. "You really shouldn't have gone to the trouble." "It was no trouble." I met his gaze directly. "I enjoy doing things properly, paying attention to the details." There was a beat of silence. David's smile tightened. "Well, we appreciate it. Everything okay? You seem quiet." I looked at Chloe. Her face was open, concerned. She saw her mother, a little tired, perhaps. She did not see the foundation of our world cracking beneath her feet. "I heard you," I said. The words were flat, bare. "From the hallway, I heard what you said." Chloe's face drained of color. The glass in her hand lowered slowly to the counter. "Mom." David straightened. "Alina, whatever you think you heard." "I heard you clearly, David." I kept my eyes on my daughter. "You think I am stupid. You believe my trust is a weakness to be exploited. You have been stealing from me. Creative restructuring, you called it." "It's not stealing," David said, his voice taking on that smooth, placating tone he used when explaining things he felt were beyond my grasp. "It's leveraging assets for family growth. Chloe is your heir. This benefits her." "Do not," I said, the first sharp edge entering my voice, "speak to me as if I am a child in your classroom." I turned to him fully. "I was an educator for 42 years. I know the difference between a lesson and a theft. And you, Chloe." Her name felt like stone in my mouth. You stood here and you listened to him call your mother stupid. You let him. Tears welled in her eyes. Mom, it's not like that. David just means you're trusting, generous. He said what he meant. I looked at the cobbler between us, a futile peace offering. He meant I am too slow to notice, too old to understand, an easy mark. David spread his hands. Let's all calm down. This is a misunderstanding. We can sit and go over the finances. You'll see it's all for the best. There will be no more going over my asterisk finances with you, I said. I smoothed the front of my dress, a simple, clean motion. Not now, not ever again. Mom, please, Chloe pleaded, taking a step toward me. I took a step back. The small movement was more final than a shout. I am leaving now. Do not call me. Do not come to my home. You're overreacting. David's composure began to crack, revealing a layer of panic. You need us. Who handles your bills, your taxes? A cold smile touched my lips. It felt foreign. I have handled my own life since long before you were born, David. I managed to raise a daughter, buy a home, and save for retirement without your help. I will continue to do so. I turned and walked back toward the hallway. My steps were even. I did not look at the family photos lining the wall. I did not look at the living room where my granddaughter played. Alina, be reasonable, David called after me, his voice rising. You can't just walk out, we're family. At the front door, I paused. I looked back at them, standing together in the wide, bright kitchen of the house my money had helped buy. Chloe was crying silently. David's face was flushed with anger and fear. You are correct, I said, my hand on the cool metal of the doorknob. Family does not do this to family, so as of this moment you are not mine. Consider this a restructuring. I opened the door and stepped outside. The afternoon sun was warm on my skin. I closed the door behind me with a soft, definitive click. The sound of the latch engaging was the only goodbye I offered. I walked to my car, an older sedan, and got inside. I placed my hands on the steering wheel. They were steady. I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. The face that looked back was familiar, the silver braids, the lines earned from smiles and worries. But the eyes were different. They were not the eyes of a woman who was sweet or slow or stupid. They were the eyes of a woman who had just seen the truth. And in that clear, cold light, a decision was made. The grief, the betrayal, the crushing weight of my daughter's complicity, that would come later, in the privacy of my own space. For now, there was only this new, sharp purpose. I started the car and drove away from Maple Drive. I did not look back. The chapter of my life where I was the trusting, doting grandmother, the easy mark, was over. The next chapter would be written by me, and it would be written with careful, precise, and undeniable force. The drive home was a blur of familiar streets. My hands remained steady on the wheel, my posture straight. It was only when I turned off the engine in my apartment's parking lot and the silence rushed in that the first crack appeared. I sat there, watching the sun cast long shadows across the asphalt. The word echoed in the stillness of the car. Stupid. I walked into my apartment. The air smelled of the lemon cleaner I used yesterday and the faint, always present scent of old books. It was quiet. It was mine. I placed my purse on the small table by the door and stood in the center of the living room. The calm I had worn like armor in their kitchen dissolved, leaving a hollow, shaking cold behind. It started as a pressure in my chest, then moved to my hands. I clasped them together, but they trembled against each other. I did not cry. Instead, I walked to the bathroom and washed my hands. I looked at my face again in the mirror. The woman who had looked back in the car was gone. Now I just looked old and tired and foolish. I turned away from the reflection. The need for order asserted itself. I changed out of my dress into a pair of soft trousers and a sweater. I made a cup of tea, the ritual of boiling the water, steeping the leaves, a familiar anchor. I carried the cup to the living room and sat in my armchair. On the side table was a framed photograph of Chloe at her college graduation, her smile wide and full of a future I had worked so hard to give her. I turned the photograph face down. Then I began to work. I went to the small desk in the corner, a tidy space with a banker's lamp. From the filing cabinet, I retrieved 2 years of bank statements, the files marked in my neat cursive. I brought them to the coffee table. I fetched my checkbook register, a notebook where I tracked bills, and the folder labeled Chloe and David. I sat on the floor, surrounded by paper. The first statement was from last month. I started there, line by line. I had always reviewed my statements, but I realized now I had reviewed them with trust. I looked for errors, for unknown charges. I had not looked for the patterns of betrayal. The first thing I saw was the automatic transfer. $500 on the 15th of every month, going to an account I did not recognize. The memo line read, family support. I had not authorized this. I found the form in the Chloe and David folder. It was a form for automated services, signed by me. David had brought it over one Sunday, saying it was a new way to simplify my monthly donation to the community center. I had signed where the yellow sticker arrow pointed. I had asked no questions. Next were the credit card statements. I had a card with a modest limit, used for groceries and occasional purchases. A second card had been issued on the account a year ago. I had no memory of requesting it. The charges on this second card were not for groceries. There were payments to high-end furniture stores, a charge for a weekend hotel in Napa Valley, a large payment to a custom audiovisual company. The billing address for this card was my address, but I had never received the statement. I found a change of address form in the folder, submitting a request for duplicate statements to be sent to a P.O. box. My signature was on the line, but the handwriting filling out the box number was David's sharp, angular print. Piece by piece, the ledger of their theft assembled itself before me. The gift of helping with a down payment on their car, which I now saw was a withdrawal from my investment portfolio that I had co-signed for them to manage. The property tax loan they had helped me secure, where the papers showed the lien was on my home, not theirs, and the funds had been directed to an account in David's name. The refinancing of my mortgage 2 years ago, which David had said would lower my monthly payments. The payments were lower, but the term was longer, and the papers showed a sizable cash-out amount I had never received. I laid each document out on the floor. I used a legal pad to make notes, date, amount, their explanation at the time, the truth I now saw. The numbers added up. They formed a column that grew longer and darker. This was not a single lapse in judgment. This was a campaign. It was systematic. It required planning and repeated, deliberate actions. The phone rang. I looked at the screen. It was Chloe. I watched it ring until it went to voicemail. A moment later, it rang again. David. I silenced the phone and placed its screen down on the table. The emotional cold was gone, replaced by a different kind of cold. It was the clear, sharp cold of absolute focus. The grief was still there, a vast, heavy stone inside me, but it was now outside the circle of light cast by my lamp. Inside the circle, there was only the evidence. I thought of David's laugh. I thought of his certainty, too stupid to notice. He was wrong. I had noticed. I had noticed the slight tension in Chloe's shoulders when I asked about their new sofa. I had noticed David's too quick explanations of financial terms. I had noticed and filed it away under family trust. I had chosen not to see. That was my failure. My failure was a kindness, a mother's hope. Their crime was to mistake that kindness for blindness and to exploit it without a shred of remorse. The shock had passed. The hurt was a constant, low pulse. What rose in its place was resolve. It was a clean, hard feeling. I gathered all the papers into a new pile. I did not put them back in the filing cabinet. I placed them in my leather satchel, the one I used for important meetings. This was the most important meeting of my life. I knew what I had to do. I could not confront them again without leverage. I needed authority. I needed to understand my position fully. I needed to turn their own weapons, paper, signatures, legalities against them. I went to the desk and opened my address book. I flipped past the numbers for plumbers and doctors until I found the entry written in firm, old-fashioned script, Arthur Henderson-esque. He had done my will years ago. He had been a friend of my late husband. He was sharp, respected, and he had always spoken to me with a directness that assumed intelligence. I looked at the clock. It was after business hours. I would call him first thing in the morning. I wrote a list of questions to ask him: power of attorney, gift law, fraud, restitution. I made a simple dinner, I ate it at the kitchen table, tasting nothing. I cleaned the plate. I washed the dish. Routine was the structure that would hold me together. That night I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The magnitude of what had happened pressed down on me. My only child. The man she had chosen. They had looked at my life's work, my security, my trust, and had seen a resource to be mined. They had discussed it in their bright kitchen, laughing at my supposed simplicity. The anger came then, not as a hot rush, but as a deep, solid glacial force. It did not shake me. It settled into my bones. It was a foundation. Tomorrow, I would call Arthur Henderson. Tomorrow, I would move from being the victim to being the architect. The lesson they thought I was too stupid to learn, I would now teach. And I would teach it so thoroughly, so precisely, that they would never forget it. I closed my eyes. I did not sleep for a long time. But when I finally did, my last conscious thought was not of loss. It was of the first move on a chessboard I had not known I was playing on. It was my turn. The morning light was clear and sharp. I dressed with care, choosing a navy blue dress and a single strand of pearls. It was armor of a different kind. My satchel, heavy with the evidence of my family's betrayal, sat by the front door. At precisely 9 o'clock, I called Arthur Henderson's office. His secretary, a woman with a calm voice who had been there for decades, recognized my name. "Alina, it's good to hear from you. Mr. Henderson has a window at 11. Can you come in then?" "I can," I said. "Thank you, Maureen." I arrived 10 minutes early. Henderson's office was in an older brick building in the city center, with polished wood floors and the scent of lemon oil and old paper. It was a place of quiet authority. Maureen smiled warmly and showed me directly into his office. Arthur Henderson rose from behind a large, orderly desk. He was in his early 70s with a full head of white hair and sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He wore a tweed jacket. He came around the desk and took both my hands in his. "Alina, it's been too long." His gaze searched my face and his smile faded. "Sit down. Tell me what's wrong." I sat in the leather client chair. He returned to his seat, his attention fully on me. No small talk. I appreciated that. "My daughter, Chloe, and her husband, David Chen, have been systematically stealing from me," I began. My voice was level. "I discovered it yesterday. I have brought documentation." I opened my satchel and placed the stacked files on his desk. I handed him my notes first, the chronological list I had made. Then I handed him the key documents, the forged transfer authorization, the credit card statements for the account I never received, the refinancing papers with the hidden cash out, the investment withdrawal forms. He took the papers. "May I?" he asked, indicating he would read them. I nodded. I sat quietly while he read. He did not skim. He read each page, his expression growing still and then hardening. His jaw tightened. Once he made a low sound in his throat, a suppressed growl of displeasure. He took off his glasses, polished them on his handkerchief, and put them back on. The ritual gave him a moment to control his reaction. When he finished, he set the last page down carefully. He looked at me, his face a mask of professional composure, but his eyes were blazing. "Alina," he said, his voice tight, "this is fraud, this is theft. This is elder financial abuse of the most calculated kind." "I know," I said. "How much have they taken?" he asked. "Based on my preliminary tally, just over $87,000 in liquid assets. The equity taken from the mortgage refinancing is another $50,000. The credit card debt they incurred in my name is approximately $20,000. They also have possession of a vehicle I co-signed for, which I am now making the payments on." He wrote the numbers down. "And your emotional state?" "I am angry," I said plainly. "I am hurt, but I am not incapacitated. I did not come here for sympathy, Arthur. I came for a strategy." He leaned back in his chair, assessing me. A slow, grim smile touched his lips. "You always were the most clear-headed person in any room. Your husband used to say that." He steepled his fingers. "You have an exceptionally strong position. The forgeries are obvious to a trained eye. The misrepresentations on the loan documents are clear. You never received the disbursed funds. This is a textbook case. You could press criminal charges." I considered this. The thought of Chloe in a courtroom, charged with a crime, sent a physical pain through me. That is a last resort. It is a weapon, not the goal. "What is your goal?" he asked. "I want my money returned, every cent. I want them to understand the weight of what they have done. I want them to feel the consequences, not in a jail cell, but in their daily lives, in their standing, in their own self-regard. And I want to ensure they can never do this to me again." I paused. "I also want to see if anything of my daughter is left under all this." He nodded slowly. "A restorative approach, more difficult than a simple legal bludgeon. It requires precise pressure." He leaned forward. "Very well, here is what we do. We proceed on 3 fronts: legal, financial, and personal." "Explain," I said. "First, the legal front. I will draft a formal letter detailing the allegations of fraud and theft. I will cite the specific laws and statutes. I will not file it yet, but it will be ready. This letter is the sword hanging over their heads. Second, the financial front. Today, we go to your bank. We revoke every authorization, every power of attorney you may have foolishly granted, every joint access. We lock your accounts down tighter than Fort Knox. We alert the credit card companies. We change all passwords and security questions. We freeze your credit. We make you a financial island." "And the personal front?" I asked. "That," he said, "is your domain. You have the community. You have the family network. Reputation matters to people like David Chen. We will use that, but carefully. The goal is to isolate them from the means to cause further harm, and then to present a path forward that is so stark, so humiliating in its righteousness, that they have no choice but to take it." "What path?" I asked. "A structured settlement, a legal agreement for restitution, but with additional non-monetary conditions, community service, family counseling, a public acknowledgement. We make the terms so reasonable and so morally unassailable that if they refuse, they look like monsters, and then we unleash the legal sword." I let the plan settle in my mind. It was intelligent. It used their own actions against them. It turned my reputation for gentleness into a strategic asset. They would not expect a fight. They would expect collapse. "They think I am too old and too slow to understand," I said. Arthur's eyes gleamed. "Then we must educate them." Maureen brought in a tea tray. The familiar ritual, the china pot, the simple cups, grounded the conversation in something normal. As we drank, Arthur outlined the specific steps for the bank. He would accompany me. His presence would signal the seriousness of the situation to the bank manager. "You are not alone in this, Aliner," he said, setting his cup down. "You have the law, you have me, and you have your own considerable mind. They picked the wrong target." For the first time since I heard David's laugh through the screen door, I felt a flicker of something other than cold anger or deep hurt. It was a sense of alignment. My resolve was no longer a solitary, sharp thing. It was now backed by structure and expertise. I finished my tea. "I am ready to go to the bank." "Good," Arthur said, standing. He gathered a fresh legal pad and his pen. "Let us go and begin the process of taking your life back. Quietly, thoroughly. We will not make a scene. We will simply make changes." As I stood, I felt the weight in my satchel, the weight of their betrayal, but it felt different now. It was no longer a burden of shame. It was evidence. It was the foundation of my countermove. The game was indeed on, but Arthur Henderson had just shown me that I held the better pieces, and I now understood the board. Arthur Henderson's car was a sensible sedan, much like my own. The drive to the bank was quiet. He did not fill the silence with pointless reassurance. He reviewed the order of operations. "We will ask for Sharon Wilkins. She's the branch manager. I've dealt with her before. She is competent and understands protocol. We will present the situation factually. You will instruct her. I will be there to clarify the legal necessities." I nodded, looking out the window at the passing streets. This was the first move on the board. It was administrative. It was quiet. It would be devastating. The bank was a solid granite building. The inside was hushed, carpeted, with the faint hum of computers and discreet conversations from behind polished desks. Arthur approached a teller and requested Ms. Wilkins. A moment later, a woman in a tailored suit emerged from an office. She was in her 50s, with a calm, alert expression. Mr. Henderson, she said, extending a hand. Then she turned to me. Mrs. Beaumont, it's good to see you. Please come to my office. We followed her into a small, private room with a desk and 3 chairs. The door clicked shut, muffling the sounds of the main bank floor. How can I help you today? Sharon Wilkins asked, sitting behind her desk. Her tone was professional, open. Arthur glanced at me, yielding the floor. This was my account, my instructions. Ms. Wilkins, I began, placing my hands flat on the desk. I have discovered that my daughter, Chloe Beaumont Chen, and her husband, David Chen, have been fraudulently accessing and diverting my funds. I am here to revoke every authorization they have, close any joint accesses, and secure my accounts. Her professional composure didn't break, but her eyes sharpened. She leaned forward slightly. I see. That is a serious matter. Do you have documentation? We do, Arthur said. He opened his briefcase and slid 2 folders across the desk. The first contains evidence of the fraudulent activities, including forged signatures on transfer authorizations. The second contains Mrs. Beaumont's formal, notarized instructions, which I prepared this morning, revoking any and all powers of attorney, third-party authorizations, and online access privileges for the named individuals. We are also here to personally verify her identity and enact these changes immediately. Sharon Wilkins opened the first folder. She scanned the documents, her lips pressing into a thin line as she saw the discrepancies in the signatures. She knew my signature from years of transactions. She looked up at me. Mrs. Beaumont, I am very sorry you are dealing with this. Thank you, I said. My focus now is on prevention. I want a complete audit of all account activity linked to their names or any authorizations they held. I want every point of access identified and closed. Of course. She turned to her computer, her fingers flying across the keyboard. Let's start with the basics. I am pulling up your primary checking and savings. For the next 40 minutes, it was a methodical dismantling. With Arthur interjecting legal terminology and I giving clear, calm confirmation, we worked through each account. I see a third-party authorization for Chloe Beaumont Chen on this savings account, Sharon said, pointing to her screen. It allows transfers and withdrawals. Revoke it, I said. Revoked, she said, typing. A few keystrokes and a line of access that had been open for 3 years disappeared. There is an online banking login associated with an email we have on file for David Chen, she noted. Disable it, change all passwords, set up new security questions. I will provide the answers in person now. I took a sheet of paper and wrote down new questions and answers, things David would never know, like the name of my first-grade teacher, the street I lived on when I was 7. She processed each instruction. We moved to investment accounts. We found the forms that had allowed David to manage my portfolio. Sharon confirmed the unauthorized withdrawals I had identified. She helped me initiate a fraud claim with the investment firm, with Arthur providing the necessary legal references. Then we addressed the credit cards. She called the card company's security department on speakerphone. I verified my identity with a series of detailed questions. I reported the fraudulent card I never received. I canceled the old account numbers and ordered new cards to be sent only to my home address, with no additional authorized users. I also need to freeze my credit with all 3 bureaus, I said, reading from my list, to prevent any new accounts from being opened in my name. Sharon nodded approvingly. A prudent step. I can help you initiate that here. It was systematic. It was thorough. There was no anger in the room, only the quiet, powerful sound of authority being reasserted. Click of keys, murmured confirmations, the scratch of Arthur's pen as he took notes, the rustle of paper as I signed fresh signature cards. Finally, Sharon sat back. I believe we have addressed every access point I can see. I have flagged your accounts for enhanced security. Any transaction over $500 will require a phone call to you for verbal confirmation. Statements will be paperless, sent only to a new email address you create today, and we will also send paper copies to your home as a backup. I would recommend you open a new, completely separate checking account for daily use, with no history connected to the old authorizations. Yes, I agreed. Let's do that now. We opened the new account. I transferred a modest sum into it. The old accounts remained, but they were now fortresses with the bridges burned. As we finished, Sharon looked at me with a mix of respect and pity. You have been very thorough, Mrs. Beaumont. Not everyone in your situation has the clarity to take these steps. I had no choice, I said simply. I gathered my copies of the new paperwork. Thank you for your discretion and efficiency. Absolutely. My direct line is on this card. She handed me a business card. Call me personally if you see anything unusual or if they attempt to contact the bank. Arthur and I walked out of the cool, quiet bank into the midday sun. The ordinary sounds of the street felt loud. That, Arthur said, placing his briefcase in the trunk, was a masterclass in calm, effective action. You were impeccable. I did not feel like a master. I felt tired, but I also felt a solid sense of accomplishment. The first wall was built. The financial lifeblood they had been siphoning was now cut off. What happens now? I asked as he drove me back to my apartment. Now, he said, we wait for the panic. They will try to access funds soon. David, from what you've said, is always in the middle of some deal. He will go to make a withdrawal or a transfer, and he will be denied. That is when they will realize the game has changed. And that, he added, is when they will truly begin to understand who they were dealing with. He dropped me off. I entered my silent apartment. I filed the new bank documents in a fresh folder labeled security. I made another cup of tea. I looked at my silent phone. It had been buzzing intermittently all morning with calls from Chloe, from David, then from numbers I didn't recognize. I had ignored them all. The quiet in the apartment was no longer oppressive. It was the quiet of a secured perimeter. The first move was complete. I had exercised quiet power. The next move was theirs, and I was ready for it. The quiet held for 2 days. I kept to my routines. I went to the community center and helped sort book donations. I did my grocery shopping. I completed the Tuesday crossword in 20 minutes. The phone sat on my kitchen counter, a silent black rectangle. I had programmed a specific ringtone for Chloe and David, silence. Their calls went directly to a new voicemail box I had set up for this purpose. I would listen, but not in real time. There was power in the delay. The first voicemail arrived on the afternoon of the second day. It was from David. His voice was strained, trying for lightness and missing. Eleanor, hi, it's David. Listen, I'm at the bank trying to sort out that transfer for the property taxes. There seems to be a hold on the account. Could you give me a quick call to verify with them? Thanks. I deleted it. An hour later, a call from Chloe. Her message was a breathless rush. Mom, hi, I'm at the design studio finalizing the furniture for the sunroom. The card, the one we use for the house, it was declined. They said the account is closed. There must be a mistake. Can you call the bank or call me, please? I deleted it. The following morning, the tone of the messages changed. David's voice had lost its polished sheen. Eleanor, this is getting serious. I have a contractor here waiting for a deposit. The bank is saying my authorizations are revoked. What is going on? You need to call me right now. This is about my business. I imagined him at the bank, smiling tensely at the teller, then stepping away to make the call, his face flushing with humiliation. The word declined would be a foreign insult to him. Chloe's next message was tearful. Mom, please, I'm scared. David is furious. The bank won't talk to me. They said only the primary account holder can make changes. What did you do? We need to talk. Please just pick up. I did not pick up. I listened to the fear in her voice. A part of me, the mother part, ached to soothe it. The larger part, the part that had been called stupid, remained still and observant. This fear was not for me. It was for the disruption of their comfort. The third day brought the panic Arthur had predicted. The voicemails came in a cluster. First, David, his voice a sharp, low hiss. This isn't funny, Eleanor. I just tried to access the investment portfolio. The login is dead. The phone line says the account is under review. You are sabotaging me. Do you understand what you're doing? You're destroying your daughter's financial stability. Then Chloe, sobbing openly. He says we can't make the car payment. He says the mortgage payment might bounce. Mom, you have to fix this. You can't just cut us off. We're family. What is wrong with you? The final message of the cluster was David again, cold and threatening. I know you're listening to these. If you think you can just lock us out and hide, you're mistaken. We will come over there. We will get lawyers. You are not in your right mind. We will have to take steps to protect your assets and ourselves. That one I saved. Arthur would want to hear a direct threat. I pictured the scene on Maple Drive with a detached clarity. The modern kitchen, once a stage for their casual betrayal, would now be a war room. David packing, running his hands through his hair, his phone pressed to his ear as he was put on hold by another financial institution. Chloe would be sitting at the island, the same spot where she had listened to him call me stupid, now staring at her own phone, watching the screen for a call back that would not come. Their wealth, the appearance of it, was a house of cards built on my money. The monthly transfers had funded their lifestyle padding. The credit card had paid for their luxuries. The investment withdrawals had been his seed capital for deals that likely existed only on paper. I had been the quiet, reliable foundation. Now I had removed myself, and the structure was groaning. I thought of my granddaughter, Lily. She would be at preschool, oblivious to the tremors shaking her home. That thought was a physical pain, a sharp cut through my resolve. But I hardened myself. A house built on theft was not a safe house. What I was doing, ultimately, was for her too, for a future where honesty was the foundation. That evening, I listened to the saved messages one more time. The evolution was clear. Confusion, annoyance, fear, anger, threat. They had moved through the stages of a trapped animal. They still believed they could intimidate me. They believed I was an old woman who had accidentally pressed a button and now, faced with their anger, would reverse it. They did not understand that every harsh word, every threatening tone, was another brick in the wall between us. It solidified my resolve. The grief was still there, but it was encased in ice. I made a simple dinner. I ate at the table. The phone buzzed again, a phantom limb. I did not look at it. Arthur called on my landline, a prearranged signal. Any developments? He asked. Panic, threats. They've realized the financial lockdown is total, I reported. Good. The disorientation phase is critical. Now, we must present the next step before they do something truly foolish, like showing up at your door. It is time to control the narrative. The invitation, I said, remembering our plan. Yes, a neutral summons, on your territory. It takes the wind out of any threat of them forcing a confrontation. You invite them. It establishes you as the one in charge of the process. After I hung up with Arthur, I picked up my cell phone. I navigated to my text messages with Chloe. The last one was from her, a week ago, a photo of Lily at the park. I looked at it for a moment, then my thumbs began to type. I wrote slowly with precision. Come for dinner Sunday, 6 p.m., we need to talk. I read it over. It was devoid of emotion. It was an instruction. It offered no comfort, no hint of reconciliation. It was a summons to the principal's office. I pressed send. The response was almost immediate. 3 dots appeared, hovered, disappeared. Then they appeared again. A full minute passed. Finally, a single word came back. Okay. I put the phone down. The quiet in my apartment deepened, but it was now charged with a new kind of tension. The panic on Maple Drive had reached its peak. Now it would be channeled toward a single point, my dining table on Sunday evening. They would come full of fear, anger, and desperate strategies. I would be waiting, calm, and prepared. The quiet power I had exercised at the bank was complete. Now it was time for the reckoning. The okay from Chloe hung in the digital air between us. There were no follow-up questions, no attempts to call. The silence from Maple Drive in the days that followed was different. It was not the silence of absence, but of frantic preparation. I knew they would be consulting lawyers, scrambling to review their own copies of documents, trying to formulate a defense. Let them. Arthur had assured me their position was sand against the rock of the evidence. My own preparation was quiet and deliberate. I cleaned my apartment, not out of a desire to impress, but to create an environment of absolute order. Every surface was dusted. The books on their shelves were straightened. The Persian rug was vacuumed until the patterns were sharp and clear. This was my territory. Every detail would reflect my control. On Saturday, I went to the market. I bought ingredients for a simple meal: a roast chicken, potatoes, green beans. I did not choose their favorite dishes. I chose food that was nourishing and plain, something to fuel a difficult conversation, not to comfort. I also bought a small chocolate cake from the bakery, for Lily if they brought her. The child should not be part of the war, even if her parents had made her a pawn in their peace. Sunday morning, I laid out my clothes. I chose a charcoal gray skirt and a pale lavender sweater. The colors were subdued but not mournful. The pearls again, armor. I polished my low-heeled shoes until they shone. In the afternoon, I began to cook. The rituals were calming: peeling the potatoes, trimming the beans, seasoning the chicken. The apartment filled with the smell of rosemary and garlic, a domestic scent that belied the coming confrontation. I set the table with my good china and the simple silverware. 3 places. I did not set a place for Lily. A high chair would be drawn up if needed, but I would not presume. At 4 o'clock, Arthur Henderson called. "Are you ready?" he asked. "I am." "Remember, you hold all the cards. You have the evidence. You have the law. You have the moral high ground. Do not let them redirect the conversation to your coldness or your overreaction. Stay on the facts. State your terms. The folder is your script." On my desk sat a slim, tan folder. Inside were 3 copies of a summary document Arthur and I had prepared. It listed, in clear bullet points, each fraudulent transaction, the evidence supporting it, the total sum taken, and the relevant laws concerning fraud and elder financial abuse. The second page outlined 2 paths. Path A was full, public legal prosecution. Path B was a private settlement with specific terms. There were lines for signatures at the bottom. "I am prepared," I said. "I will be by my phone from 5:30 onward. If you feel unsafe, or if they become belligerent, you call me. I can be there in 15 minutes. "I do not think it will come to that," I said. David's aggression was for voicemail, and for a mother he thought was weak. In the face of calm, documented authority, I suspected it would crumble. I finished cooking. The chicken rested under foil. The vegetables were ready to be steamed. The cake sat in its box on the counter. At 5:45, I poured myself a glass of water. I did not drink alcohol. I needed my mind clear. I sat in my armchair and waited. The clock on the mantel ticked softly. I watched the minute hand move. I did not fidget. I breathed slowly in and out. I visualized the meeting. I saw myself calm. I saw them entering, their faces either angry or pleading. I saw myself gesturing to the table. I heard myself speaking in the measured tone I had used in the library with agitated students long ago. At 6 o'clock precisely, the doorbell rang. I stood. I smoothed my skirt. I walked to the door and opened it. They stood on the landing. Chloe was in front, her eyes wide and red-rimmed. She had dressed carefully in a nice blouse and slacks, an attempt at normalcy that failed to mask her anxiety. David stood just behind her, his jaw set. He wore a sports coat but no tie. His expression was a mix of defiance and deep unease. He held Lily on his hip. My granddaughter, in a pretty yellow dress, looked at me and smiled. "Grandma." "Hello, Lily," I said, my voice softening for her alone. I looked at her parents. "Come in." They filed past me. I caught the scent of Chloe's perfume, something expensive David had probably bought with my money. David's eyes scanned the apartment, taking in the set table, the normalcy, as if looking for traps. "Can I get Lily settled?" Chloe asked, her voice small. "The high chair is in the corner. You may bring it to the table." I did not offer to hold my granddaughter. The distance was necessary. Chloe moved to get the chair. David stood awkwardly in the middle of the living room, shifting Lily's weight. "Dinner is ready. Please sit." I gestured to the dining table. We took our seats. Chloe helped Lily into the high chair and gave her a cracker from her purse. I brought the food to the table and served each plate, starting with Lily's. The actions were automatic, civil. For a few minutes, there was only the sound of serving spoons and Lily's happy babbling. David picked up his fork but did not eat. "Eleanor, we need to." "We will talk after we eat," I said, cutting him off. This is a dinner table. We will observe basic civility." He flushed but put his fork down. Chloe stared at her plate, a tear splashing onto the green beans. She did not wipe it away. The meal was consumed in near silence. I ate. I tasted the food. I asked Lily about her preschool. She chattered about painting and a story about a rabbit. It was the only conversation. David and Chloe picked at their food. When the plates were mostly full but the meal clearly over, I rose. I cleared the dishes, stacking them neatly in the sink. I returned to the table. I did not sit. "Lily," I said, "would you like to see the picture book in the living room, the one with the animals?" She nodded eagerly. Chloe, understanding, quickly unbuckled her and carried her to the armchair, placing the book in her lap. "You look at the pictures, sweetheart. Mommy and Daddy are talking with Grandma." I went to my desk and retrieved the tan folder. I placed it on the table between David and Chloe's empty places. I finally took my seat. "Now," I said, opening the folder, "we will talk." I placed the first page of the summary before Chloe and the second before David. I kept the third for myself. "This document outlines the financial transactions you executed using my assets and my authority without my knowledge or consent," I began. My voice was the one I had used for parent-teacher conferences. Firm, factual, leaving no room for debate. Each item is numbered. You will see the date, the amount, the stated purpose at the time, and the actual disposition of funds. The supporting documents, including the forms with forged signatures, are compiled in the appendix. David's eyes scanned the page. His face, already pale, went ashen. He had expected bluster, tears, a messy emotional scene he could manipulate. He was not prepared for a spreadsheet of his crimes. Chloe made a small, choked sound. Her hand flew to her mouth as she read the first item. "The automatic transfer, you said it was for the community center," she whispered, not to me, but to David. "It was a simplification," David started, his voice regaining some of its slick defensiveness. "Alina, you have to understand the context. We were consolidating for efficiency." "Item 2, I continued, as if he had not spoken. "The credit card issued on my account, number ending in 4482. Billing address redirected to a postal box you rented. Total charges, $19,842.16 for home furnishings, travel, and electronics. I have never seen this card. I did not authorize it." "That was for the house, for all of us," Chloe burst out, tears streaming now. "We wanted you to be comfortable when you visited." I looked at her. "I have visited your home 12 times in the past year. I sat on the sofa purchased with that card. You never mentioned it was bought with my money. You let me compliment you on your taste." She flinched as if struck. David leaned forward, his hands flat on the table. "This is a one-sided interpretation. You gave us permission to help manage your affairs. We made judgment calls. This tabulation makes it look sinister." "It is not a judgment call to sign my name on a cash-out refinance of my home and divert the funds to your personal account," I said, my tone unchanged. I pointed to item 4 on his sheet. "That is forgery. That is fraud. The notary's stamp is dated on a Tuesday at 2 p.m. I was at the community center leading a reading group that day. 30 people can attest to that. You had the document notarized without me present." The last of his bluster drained away. He had not anticipated I would check the notary's log. "The total," I said, pausing to let the number settle in the silent room, "is $157,620.44. That is what you have taken. That does not include the interest I lost, the penalties I may incur, or the legal fees I am now obliged to pay." I didn't think it was that much," Chloe sobbed, her body collapsing in on itself. "Because you did not look," I said. "You chose not to see the details. That was your complicity." David found his voice again, but it was hollow, stripped of its confidence. "What do you want? You cut off the accounts. You've humiliated us. Is that enough?" "No," I said. I turned to the second page of the document. "Humiliation is not the goal. Restitution and reformation are. You have two choices. They are outlined here as Path A and Path B." Chloe wiped her eyes, trying to focus on the words. David stared, uncomprehending. Path A is a public legal course. I will file criminal charges for fraud and financial abuse of an elder. I will file civil suits for restitution and punitive damages. Mr. Henderson is prepared to do this tomorrow. The evidence will become part of the public record. Your professional reputation, David, will not survive it. Your standing in this community, Chloe, will be erased. The financial penalties, beyond returning what you stole, will likely bankrupt you. You may face incarceration. The word incarceration hung in the air like a physical object. Chloe let out a small, terrified whimper. David's breathing became shallow. Path B, I continued, is a private settlement. It requires 4 things. First, full financial restitution of the stated amount. You will sign a legally binding payment plan with interest to be administered by Mr. Henderson's office. Second, David will perform 200 hours of community service at the Franklin Senior Community Center under the supervision of the director, a friend of mine. The work will be manual, painting, cleaning, moving furniture. Third, Chloe and I will attend weekly family therapy sessions for a minimum of 6 months to address what has happened and determine if a relationship is possible going forward. Fourth, you will both offer a sincere, public apology to me at a family gathering I will convene. David stared at me. Community service, therapy, this is insane. You can't dictate terms like this. I can, I said, and I am. The alternative is Path A, the choice is yours. You would send your own daughter to jail. He spat, a last, desperate attempt to shift the moral burden. I turned my gaze to Chloe. I would be reporting a crime that was committed. The choice to commit it was yours, both of yours. I did not force you to forge my signature. I did not force you to divert my money. I offered trust. You returned it with theft. Now I am offering a path back. A difficult one, but a path. Chloe was shaking her head slowly, her eyes locked on the paper. The sheer weight of the evidence, presented so calmly, had bypassed her defenses. She was confronted not with her angry mother, but with the ledger of her betrayal. I'm so sorry, Mom, she whispered, the words barely audible. I'm so sorry. It got away from us. He said it was just borrowing. It was not borrowing, I stated. Borrowing requires asking. You did not ask, you took, you lied, you mocked me for not noticing. She broke then, her body folding over the table in heaving sobs. David looked at her, then at the document, then at me. The reality of his situation was settling upon him. The law was on my side. The evidence was irrefutable. His cleverness had been a facade, and I had peeled it back to reveal the ugly fraud beneath. You have until 9 o'clock tomorrow morning to inform Mr. Henderson of your decision, I said, closing my folder. You may take your copies, discuss it. If I do not hear from him by that time, he will proceed with Path A. I stood up. The meeting was over. It is time for you to leave now. Please take Lily home. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by Chloe's ragged breathing. I walked to the living room and picked up my granddaughter, who was drowsy over her book. I held her close for a moment, breathing in her sweet, innocent scent. Then I carried her to the door, where Chloe, shaky and broken, took her into her arms without a word. David stood slowly, gathering the papers. He would not meet my eyes. He followed his wife out into the hall. I closed the door. I did not lock it. I stood with my back against it, listening to their retreating footsteps on the stairs. The power in the room, which had been so tightly focused around the table, dissipated, leaving only the faint smell of uneaten food and the profound silence of a battle concluded. I had laid everything bare. I had not raised my voice. I had stated facts. I had offered a choice between annihilation and arduous redemption. The ball was now in their court, but the court, I knew, was mine. The reckoning was complete. The terms were set. I did not sleep that night. The silence after they left was not peaceful. It was the silence of a field after a battle, charged with the echoes of what had been said. I cleaned the kitchen meticulously. I washed the dishes that had never been eaten from. I put the untouched chicken away. I wiped the table where Chloe's tears had fallen. The ordinary work of restoration kept my hands busy and my mind from spiraling into the chasm of what I had just done. At 7 the next morning, Arthur Henderson called. They contacted me, he said without preamble. Through David's attorney, a brief, tense conversation. They choose Path B. I let out a breath I had not realized I was holding. The relief was not warm. It was a simple acknowledgement that the more controllable, though longer, road had been taken. What now? Now we make it ironclad. I will draft the settlement agreement today. It will include the payment plan schedule, the community service parameters, the requirement for therapy with a provider of my approval, and the stipulation for the public apology. It will also include a confidentiality clause. They cannot discuss the terms publicly, and a clause stating that any violation of the terms reinstates our right to pursue Path A immediately. Will they sign it? I asked. They have no leverage. Their own lawyer, once he saw the evidence I provided a summary of, advised them to agree. He knows they would be destroyed in court. This is their only exit. When? I will have it ready by tomorrow afternoon. Can you come to the office at 3? I will have them come at 4. We will do the signing here. A neutral, professional setting. I will be there. The next 36 hours passed in a strange limbo. I went to the community center as usual. I greeted my friends. I helped box books for the annual sale. No one knew that the calm, smiling Alina Beaumont had just orchestrated the surrender of her own family. The normality was a shield. At 3 o'clock the following day, I sat in Arthur's office. He handed me the document. It was 12 pages long. The language was dense, legal, but the terms we had discussed were all there, rendered into binding prose. Read it carefully, Arthur said. This is your protection. I read every word. The payment plan was aggressive but not impossible, structured to reclaim the principal within 5 years, with interest. The community service was specified, 200 hours at the Franklin Center, to be completed within 6 months, with work logs signed by the director. The therapy mandate required a minimum of 24 joint sessions with a therapist I approved. The apology was to be delivered in the presence of myself and at least 2 other family members of my choosing. It is thorough, I said, placing it back on his desk. It is meant to be. He leaned forward. Alina, this is not a victory party today. This is a surgical procedure. There will be pain. There will be resentment. You must be prepared to see it in their faces and not waver. I am prepared. At 4 o'clock precisely, Maureen showed them in. David entered first, followed by Chloe. They looked like different people. The polished confidence was gone. David's posture was stiff, his eyes avoiding mine. Chloe looked hollowed out, her face pale and bare of makeup. They sat in the 2 chairs facing Arthur's desk. I sat in a chair to the side, an observer to the formalities. Arthur did not offer pleasantries. We are here to execute the settlement agreement. I have explained the terms to your counsel, Mr. Chen, Ms. Beaumont Chen. This document, once signed, is a legally binding contract. Do you understand? David gave a short, sharp nod. Chloe whispered, yes. You will each sign on the final page, and your signatures will be notarized by Maureen. Mrs. Beaumont will sign as the aggrieved party. I will sign as witness and as her counsel. He slid copies toward them. Read them again. The room was silent except for the rustle of paper. David scanned the pages, his jaw working. When he reached the community service section, a muscle twitched in his cheek. Chloe read slowly, her fingers tracing the lines about therapy. A tear dropped onto the page, and she quickly brushed it away, smudging the ink slightly. Do you have any questions? Arthur asked. David cleared his throat. The payment schedule. The first installment is due in 30 days. That is a significant amount. It is approximately 1/60th of the total you owe, Arthur said, his voice cool. It is reasonable. Do you wish to contest it? David's eyes flicked to me, then away. No. Then we will proceed. Maureen entered with her notary stamp. Arthur handed me a pen. I stood and walked to the desk. I signed my name on the line indicated, Alina R. Beaumont. The pen moved smoothly. I felt nothing but the weight of the commitment. I returned to my seat. Arthur signed as witness. Then it was their turn. Chloe stood first. Her hand trembled as she took the pen. She hesitated, looking at me. Mom, she began, but no other words came. She bent and signed her name, Chloe L. Beaumont Chen *. The pen left a shaky trail. David stood. He took the pen from Chloe, his movements rigid. He did not look at anyone. He signed with a quick, angry slash, David W. Chen asterisk. He dropped the pen on the desk. Maureen stepped forward, applied her stamp and seal next to each signature, and recorded the details in her logbook. The clicks of the stamp were final. "Copies for each of you," Arthur said, distributing the documents. "My office will administer the payment plan. You will receive instructions for the community service from the Franklin Center director by the end of the week. Mrs. Beaumont will provide you with the name of the approved therapist. The apology gathering will be scheduled at her discretion. Are there any further questions?" David picked up his copy, folded it once, and shoved it into his jacket's inner pocket. "No," he said, his voice tight. Chloe clutched hers to her chest, shaking her head. "Then this meeting is concluded," Arthur said. They stood and walked to the door. Chloe paused, her hand on the knob. She turned back, her eyes swimming with a turmoil of shame, fear, and a desperate, faint hope. I met her gaze but did not smile, did not nod. The time for maternal reassurance was over. That bridge would have to be rebuilt, plank by painful plank, in a therapist's office. She turned and followed her husband out. The door closed. Arthur let out a long breath. "It is done." I looked at the document in my hands. The terms were set. The amends, however painful, would now begin. The legal and financial lockdown was complete. Now came the harder part, the living out of the consequences. I felt no triumph. Only the heavy certainty of a necessary task and a small, fragile seed of something that might one day grow back into peace. The signed agreement sat in my top desk drawer. It was not a trophy. It was a blueprint for a difficult, necessary reconstruction. The machinery of the terms began to move with a quiet, relentless efficiency. Arthur's office handled the first payment installment. The funds were transferred electronically from David's account to the escrow account Arthur had established. There was no fanfare. A line item in a bank ledger shifted from his column to mine. The first measure of restitution. The director of the Franklin Senior Community Center, Grace Watson, called me. Grace is a formidable woman in her 60s, a retired principal, and a longtime friend. She had been briefed in general terms by Arthur. "Eleanor, I received the formal paperwork from the lawyer. A Mr. David Chen is to report to me Saturday morning at 8 a.m. for his first shift." Her voice was neutral, professional. "I have a list of tasks. The multi-purpose room needs repainting. The storage shed requires a deep clean and reorganization." "Thank you, Grace. I trust your judgment completely. I will treat him as I would any volunteer, firmly, fairly, and with clear expectations. But I will be watching." On Saturday morning, I arrived at the center at 9, 2 hours after his start time. I did not come to gloat. I came to witness. I had a standing commitment to help with the morning book club. It was my normal routine. I entered through the side door near the kitchen. The sounds of the center enveloped me, the chatter from the card game in the lounge, the clatter of dishes from the kitchen, the distant sound of an exercise class. I made my way to the multi-purpose room. The door was propped open. Inside, David stood on a ladder, rolling pale yellow paint onto the upper part of a wall. He wore old jeans and a faded t-shirt, clothes I had never seen him in. A drop cloth was spread beneath him. His movements were stiff, mechanical. He did not notice me in the doorway. Grace was there, supervising. She pointed to a section near the ceiling. "You missed a spot there, David. See how the old color is showing through? You need to go over it again, even strokes. Take your time." He paused, looked where she pointed, and gave a curt nod. He dipped his roller and applied more paint, his jaw tight. There was no charm in his demeanor now, only a sullen concentration. I saw several of my friends, Mavis, from the quilting group, and Ben, who taught chess, sitting at a table just outside the door, ostensibly sorting donations of puzzles. Their presence was not an accident. Grace had likely mentioned nothing, but word travels in a place like this. They were there as benign witnesses, a gentle but unyielding audience to his humiliation. David descended the ladder to refill his paint tray. As he bent over, he saw me. He froze for an instant, then straightened up, his face a mask of cold resentment. He gave no sign of recognition. He turned his back to the door and resumed his work, his strokes becoming more forceful. I continued on to the library room. That was all I needed to see. He was there. He was doing the work. The polished real estate agent was now a painter in a room full of curious seniors. The punishment was not in the labor, but in the context. In the eyes of people whose respect he would never have. It was the humiliation that heals, or that begins to. Later that week, it was time for the first therapy session. I had chosen Dr. Evelyn Evans, a therapist Arthur recommended and I had interviewed. She was around my age, no nonsense, with a reputation for navigating complex family dynamics without taking sides. Chloe and I arrived separately. We met in the waiting room. She looked at the floor. We did not speak. When Dr. Evans called us in, we took seats in 2 adjacent chairs, a small table between us. "Thank you both for coming," Dr. Evans began. "This is a space for truth. It will be uncomfortable. My role is to facilitate a conversation that, hopefully, can lead to understanding. Alina, Chloe, are you both clear on why we are here?" "Yes," I said. Chloe nodded, her hands clenched in her lap. "Chloe, would you like to begin by stating why you believe we are here?" Dr. Evans asked. Chloe swallowed. Her voice was thin. "We're here because I betrayed my mother. I helped my husband take money from her. I lied to her. I let her be disrespected." The words, practiced or not, were the first honest accounting I had heard from her. "And how did that happen?" Dr. Evans's tone was not accusatory. It was curious. "It all came out in a rush then. The pressure she felt to keep up with David's ambitions, the gradual erosion of her own judgment. The first time she signed a form for him without reading it thoroughly. The way he framed it as helping me, as simplifying things. Her growing unease, smothered by his assurances and her own desire for a peaceful, affluent life. She spoke of the shame that started small but grew every time I visited, every time I was kind to her. He said she was too sweet to notice. Too out of touch," Chloe whispered, tears flowing freely now. "And a part of me wanted to believe that because if she was just sweet and out of touch, then what we were doing wasn't so bad. It was just managing. But I always knew it was wrong." I sat listening. I did not reach for her. I did not offer absolution. I let her words hang in the quiet room. It was the first step of her amends, the full, unvarnished confession. Dr. Evans turned to me. "Alina, what did you hear?" I took a moment. I heard her describe a series of choices, each one moving her further away from the daughter I raised. I heard her acknowledge the wrong. That is a start. "What do you need from Chloe to begin to rebuild trust?" Dr. Evans asked. "I need consistency," I said, looking at my daughter for the first time that hour. "I need to see her make the hard choice not just once but repeatedly. When the therapy gets difficult, when David resents the payments, when the shame feels unbearable, I need to see her choose honesty even when it costs her, for a long time." Chloe met my gaze, her eyes filled with a pain that was no longer just self-pity. It was the pain of seeing the damage clearly. "I don't know if I can," she said, her voice breaking, "but I want to try." Dr. Evans nodded. "That is where we begin, with the wanting to try." The session ended. We walked out to our separate cars in silence. The chasm between us was still vast, but a single, fragile rope bridge had been thrown across it, one made of painful words and stark realizations. Driving home, I felt drained. The scenes played in my mind. David's rigid back in the community center, Chloe's tearful confession. This was the living consequence. It was not satisfying in a vengeful way. It was grim and sad and necessary. They were beginning to serve their sentence. And I, for the first time since I heard that conversation through the screen door, felt a faint, tentative sense that the ground beneath my feet might one day be solid again. The healing, for all of us, would be a long and arduous road, but the first steps had been taken. The final condition was the public apology. I scheduled it for a Sunday afternoon, 4 weeks after the signing of the agreement. I did not invite a large crowd. I chose my sister, Clara, and her husband, Charles. I also invited Arthur Henderson. These were people who knew me, who had a sense of the family, and whose judgment I trusted. Their presence would provide witness without spectacle. I prepared my apartment as I had for the fateful dinner, but this time there was no meal. I set out coffee, tea, and a plate of cookies. It was a gathering, not a celebration. Clara and Charles arrived first. Clara hugged me tightly, her eyes full of unasked questions and fierce loyalty. "However this goes, we're here," she murmured. Arthur arrived next, giving my shoulder a brief, reassuring squeeze. We did not discuss the details. He was here as my friend and as a professional safeguard. At 2 o'clock, the doorbell rang. I answered it. Chloe stood there, holding Lily's hand. David stood a step behind them, his hands shoved into his pockets. He was wearing a simple button-down shirt, no jacket. He looked like a man going to a difficult business meeting. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. The living room felt full with the 7 of us. Lily, sensing the tense atmosphere, clung to Chloe's leg. I gestured for everyone to sit. Clara and Charles took the sofa. Arthur took the armchair by the window. I remained standing near the fireplace. Chloe and David sat on the 2 straight-backed chairs I had placed in the center of the room. They were the focal point. There was a moment of oppressive quiet. Charles cleared his throat. Clara gave me an encouraging nod. I spoke first. "Thank you all for coming. We are here because a significant wrong was committed against me by my daughter and my son-in-law. As part of our agreement to move forward, they have agreed to offer a sincere apology in the presence of family. David, Chloe, you may proceed." Chloe looked at David. He sat very still, his back rigid. He had prepared something. I could see a stiffness in his posture that suggested rehearsed lines. He took a deep, shaky breath and began, his eyes fixed on a point on the wall behind me. I want to apologize to Alina," he started, his voice flat. "For my actions regarding her finances, I overstepped my role. I made poor decisions that caused her distress. I am sorry for that." The room was silent. It was an apology crafted by a lawyer. It was generic. It took no real responsibility. It did not mention theft or fraud or mocking words. I waited. I did not look at Arthur, but I felt his disapproving gaze on David. Chloe was staring at her husband, her face pale. She then turned her eyes to me, and I saw a flare of something, frustration, despair in her gaze. She looked down at her hands, clenched in her lap. David stopped. He seemed to think he was finished. "Is that all?" I asked, my tone neutral. He shifted in his chair. "I am sorry for the trouble it caused." Arthur spoke then, his voice calm but carrying a legal weight. "Mr. Chen, the agreement specified a sincere public apology. It was to acknowledge the specific wrongs done, not poor decisions or trouble. The wrongs were fraud, forgery, and financial exploitation. The words you used to describe Mrs. Beaumont were stupid and slow. An apology that does not name the transgression is no apology at all." David's face flushed a deep red. He looked from Arthur to me, to Clara and Charles, who were watching him with stern, expectant faces. He saw no sympathy, only a demand for truth. The safety of his vague corporate language was stripped away. He was in a room that demanded moral accounting. He closed his eyes for a second. When he opened them, he looked at the floor. His voice, when it came, was lower, stripped of its polish. "I am sorry that I stole from you, Alina. I am sorry that I forged your signature. I am sorry that I lied to you and manipulated you. I am sorry that I called you, that I said those terrible things about your intelligence. I was arrogant and I was wrong. I am sorry." The words hung in the air. They were specific. They were ugly. They were true. All eyes turned to Chloe. She was crying silently. She wiped her cheeks and looked directly at me, her gaze unwavering through her tears. "Mom," she said, her voice trembling but clear. "I am so sorry. I betrayed you. I let David convince me that what we were doing was okay, and I knew it was. I chose my desire for an easy life over my loyalty to you. I failed as a daughter. I am sorry for every lie, for every time I let him disrespect you, for every dollar we took. I am sorry for the pain I caused. You didn't deserve any of it. I will spend a long time trying to earn back your trust if you'll let me." She broke off, sobbing, her hands covering her face. The room was utterly still. The apology had been delivered. It was raw, it was painful, and it was real. I looked at my sister. Clara gave me a small, solemn nod. Arthur's expression was one of grim satisfaction. Charles looked at David with a frown, then at Chloe with a touch of pity. I walked over to the box of tissues on the side table, took one, and handed it to Chloe. It was not an embrace. It was a small gesture of basic humanity. She took it, her fingers brushing mine. "I accept your apologies," I said, addressing them both. My voice was firm. Acceptance does not mean instant forgiveness. It does not mean the past is erased. It means I acknowledge the words you have said today. The work of rebuilding begins with truth. You have started that work. You must continue it. The terms of our agreement stand. We will proceed. I turned to the rest of the room. Thank you all for being here as witnesses. The formal part of the gathering was over. The tension eased, though it did not vanish. Clara went to pour coffee. Charles engaged Arthur in quiet conversation about a local political issue. Lily, seeing the adults relax a little, toddled over to me and held up her arms. "Up, Grandma." I picked her up. She settled against my shoulder, her small, warm weight a comfort. Chloe watched us, her eyes filled with a complex mix of grief and longing. David stood up abruptly. "I need some air," he muttered, and walked out onto my small balcony, closing the glass door behind him. He stood with his back to us, looking out over the quiet street. Chloe came and stood beside me, watching Lily play with the strand of my pearls. "She misses you," Chloe said softly. "I have missed her," I replied. It was the first personal, non-adversarial words we had exchanged in months. "The therapy, it's hard, but it's good. Dr. Evans is helping me see things," Chloe said, her voice tentative. "I am glad," I said. It was not a warm endorsement, but it was an acknowledgement. After a half hour, people began to leave. Clara and Charles hugged me, whispering their support. Arthur shook my hand, his grip firm. "You did it, Aliner. The foundation is laid, now you build." Finally, it was just the four of us again. David came in from the balcony, his expression subdued. He did not speak. He simply collected their things. Chloe took Lily from my arms. Would it be okay if we came by next Saturday, just for a short visit, with Lily?" I considered it. The apology was done. The mechanisms of restitution were in motion. A short, supervised visit, focused on the child, was a reasonable next step. "Yes, Saturday at 10, for an hour." A flicker of genuine relief passed over her face. "Thank you, Mom." They left. I closed the door and leaned against it as I had the night of the reckoning dinner. But the silence that greeted me now was different. It was not the silence of a battlefield, but the silence of a construction site after the workers have gone home for the day. The rubble had been cleared. The ground had been leveled. The blueprint was in hand. I walked to the living room window and watched their car pull away. The late afternoon sun slanted through the trees, casting long, peaceful shadows. I was alone in my apartment. My money was secured. My dignity had been reclaimed. My family was broken but not destroyed. It was a painful, fragile new beginning built on the unshakable foundation of truth and consequence. I felt a quiet, solid strength. The reckoning was over. The healing, slow and uncertain, could now truly begin. I was at peace and I was in control.